We've had some amazing Zelda games in recent years, from Breath of the Wild to Tears of the Kingdom and Echoes of Wisdom. And while we don't have any official word on a new Zelda game as of yet, it's fun to always speculate about what could be in store for us, especially when we know that the Switch 2 is right around the corner of being shown off at the April 2nd presentation. The Zelda series has always been known for its innovative gameplay mechanics, memorable characters, and epic storylines, and with the Switch, we've seen some interesting new takes on the classic Zelda formula. In fact, it's because of this new style of Zelda that has created a rift in the fan base of those who like the openness of Breath of the Wild and the freedom to go and do whatever you like with no restrictions. But then you have the other side that values the more traditional linear formula of the series. And I think it is safe to say that when you make such drastic changes in a long-standing series such as Zelda, there is definitely going to be this sort of divide amongst the masses. So how could the Zelda team balance these two elements together to solve the issue that many have voiced their displeasure of, with Tears of the Kingdom particularly? What needs to change for the next Zelda game on the Switch 2? With Zelda being one of my favorite, if not my most favorite franchise ever made, I'm going to try to break down what I believe could lead to a potentially new and better Zelda experience for both sides. What's up guys, Tactics here with another video for you. Let's not waste any more time and dive right in. Let me start off by addressing the graphics and overall art design. The Switch 2 is rumored to have some serious horsepower under the hood compared to the Switch 1, and I believe could rival the PlayStation 4 in terms of graphics, which could mean some truly stunning visuals. I was absolutely blown away from the very beginning of Breath of the Wild. I'm not sure any other game will ever be able to capture that same feeling of stepping out into the world and seeing this vast land in the distance. To be honest, there has never really been a 3D Zelda game that I've disliked the art style of. The fact that the Zelda team was able to create such a huge expansive world and have it run fairly well, albeit aside from a few areas in the game, was quite a feat with the Switch 1. Every area was lit up with vibrant colors, from the grasslands to the desert and even atop the snowy mountains. Once again, there were a few hiccups in certain areas like the Korok Forest, but by the time Tears of the Kingdom released, I don't really remember having any issues with the performance. However, despite all of this, I have to admit I am quite tired of this art style. We've seen this sort of style 3 times already with Breath of the Wild, Tears of the Kingdom, and then Age of Calamity. I truly believe that the Zelda team got their money's worth out of making this world with these 3 games, and now I think it's time to move on to greener pastures for the next Zelda. As much as I love this world and the characters that envelop it, I'm also pretty sick of them as well, but we'll get to the characters very soon. In terms of the overall art design though, I have complete faith that the Zelda team will do a solid job of providing us with a new visual spectacle of Hyrule, or maybe even some other place outside of Hyrule. Either way, it's fine with me. The setting of Zelda has never really been a major concern of mine so long as it's able to distinguish itself apart from other installments. Over the course of 20 years, Zelda has made leaps and bounds in terms of its gameplay, to having an overworld where you travel to different locations fighting monsters along the way, to implementing time travel to the story, using masks to transform into iconic Zelda races, and even conquering the skies. No biome, no environment or location in the world is safe when the Legend of Zelda is involved. And since the Zelda team has pretty much been moving steadily in the direction of bringing more technology into the Zelda formula, it begs the question of, what's next? Space, perhaps? Honestly, that would be pretty crazy to see how they make a game that takes place across the galaxy or something. Surely the Zelda team wouldn't take it that far though, would they? I say that half jokingly because considering that the Zelda team has always wanted to make Zelda be like this sort of mix of fantasy meet technology kind of series. But I believe if they took the story to space, it would maybe lean more on the side of sci-fi rather than fantasy. But putting all the space talk aside, I think they need to actually dial back on the technology. I feel like Zelda is at its best when it leans more on the side of fantasy. There's nothing like adventuring around the world and coming across some old ancient ruins that have long since been forgotten for years, and it leads me into my first major topic. If there's one major complaint that I have heard across the entire fan base is the dungeon design in Breath of the Wild and also in Tears of the Kingdom. The Zelda team completely restructured how dungeons both appear and the atmosphere of them. Each traditional dungeon came with its own theme and sort of puzzles that made them stand out from one another. Anyone who has played the old traditional games like Ocarina of Time can easily distinguish how radically different the dungeons are in Breath of the Wild and Tears. In Breath, they take the form as divine beasts that give off this sort of stagnant, mechanical structure that seems devoid of life. There are hardly any unique enemies inside of these dungeons, and they feel just very confined. And this would make sense considering you are inside of a mechanical structure where there aren't too many places to go. And the worst part of this is that you repeat this 4 times throughout the entire game. So what kind of puzzles are associated with these dungeons? Well, activating terminals in several locations. These terminals act as a sort of gateway that leads you into a boss battle with the same looking, similar design across all 4 dungeons. Tears of the Kingdom tried to take a step back in the right direction, but somehow still fell into the same trap as Breath. You activate some terminals with some underwhelming puzzles that lead you into a boss battle. The best part of the dungeons in Tears were indeed the bosses, much better than Breath of the Wild at least, but the battles don't make up for the slog of a dungeon you had to go through to reach them. So what can be done to solve this issue? Well, first, let me point out by saying that I'm no game designer by any means, but I believe that there are a few clues that we can address here that can lead to an understanding of why these dungeons were designed the way they were, and maybe come up with some sort of solution to the issue. First, let's look at the modern day dungeons of Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. One major factor is that these dungeons were made to fit within the open world. Meaning, in order to have no sort of loading screen or loading time, these dungeons needed to be able to exist within the open world instead of being segmented off from the world. Because of how the world is structured, the dungeons had to fit into a place in the environment that it was located in. Think of it as a puzzle board. There's only one place that a certain puzzle piece can fit into the board that would make sense. Making a dungeon with many corridors and hallways that can stretch across the map too far could have caused some issues, so the Zelda team may have had to just make do with the little space they had for these dungeons. That's why every dungeon essentially had a certain point that funneled the player into before having some similar rooms branch off into several different directions. When you have a structure like this, you are limited to how elaborate you can make the dungeons and the puzzles be. Now let's look at more traditional dungeons. Each dungeon is not restricted to having to fit within the world, because they were able to segment off the dungeons from the overworld via a loading screen. This led to more creativity on how they could design puzzles and make them more engaging. Now, I don't have an issue with having multiple ways of solving these puzzles, so long as the tools that we are given in the overworld does not completely trivialize a dungeon. That's why I think we do need a return of key items inside of dungeons to some degree. I think having restrictions on the player is actually a good thing, so long as it's done in a way that makes it engaging for the player. Take a look at Eventide Island, for example, in Breath of the Wild. I think throughout many people's playthroughs, this was one of their major highlights throughout the entire game. And this is one of the areas where you are at your most restricted, as the game takes away all your items that you've collected up until this point. You have to make do with what you have on the island. There's even an example of this as well in Tears of the Kingdom, where there are certain shrines that you can enter that will restrict the player by taking away their items, and you have to make do with what items you get in that particular area or what you can scrape off the enemies. Forcing the player to switch up their way of tackling a situation in certain parts of the game adds more depth to the gameplay. Now, there is no doubt in my mind that the next 3D Zelda game is going to be open world. The Zelda team has already stated that this will be a staple of Zelda for the foreseeable future, which I don't have a real problem with. I just don't want the developers to have to sacrifice their creativity on dungeon design for the sake of making this huge, expansive open world and filling it with tons of things for us to do. I just find it very ironic how we got the most open, most expansive world in Zelda to date that allowed us to do just about anything we wanted. But in the process of making this open world, the developers were so restricted on making good dungeon designs and puzzles. Instead, they used all that creativity on shrines. Personally, I'm quite sick of shrines just as much as I'm sick of the Breath of the Wild world. Now don't get me wrong, I think the shrines had some of the best puzzles in the entire series. It's just very unfortunate that all of these fantastic ideas were made in the form of mini dungeons. And yes, believe it or not, shrines were indeed the mini dungeons in these two games. I think there were too many of them, and I think they took away something truly special from the traditional Zelda formula, the reward system. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, I just missed the good old days of solving a overworld puzzle and getting a heart piece for it, or even something like an empty bottle was just nice to have. However, all your major rewards are gifted to you by the shrines, or you get some of your major abilities at the very beginning of the game. Meanwhile, taking down a Bokoblin camp will net you a few rupees or some arrows. I would have loved to have been able to enter a camp of monsters, defeat them, and then receive a heart piece for my hard-earned victory. I'm certain that the stamina wheel will also make a return so long as the open world formula continues in Zelda. I wouldn't mind if we still had shrines, I just don't think we need over 100 of them. As for what sort of reward you get for completing these shrines, maybe bring back the magic meter. Tears had the Zonai energy capsules to power Zonai tools, but I would like to see more magic come back to the series. Why does Link's moveset have to have a cooldown effect like with Urbosa's Fury, or some weird partner gimmick with the sages in Tears of the Kingdom? You have to walk up to the sage to activate their ability, and it can be pretty frustrating when there's a lot of action going on. Upgrading your magic meter by completing shrines will be a nice alternative, and it cuts down on having so damn many of them. In an open world game, there should be many side quests you can take on to upgrade Link in some way without locking a majority of his upgrades behind one major mechanic like the shrines. Speaking of upgrading Link though, I think the Breath of the Wild Link is one of the best and weakest at the same time. In the story, he's depicted as a one-man army able to slaughter countless monsters, solidifying him as one of the best, if not the best swordsman in the kingdom. So why is his moveset so limited? There are 3 weapon types Link can wield, like the one- and two-handed weapons, and then you have the spears. And honestly, I don't really think we need any more weapon types in the game. I think the amount that we got in Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom was fine enough. However, each weapon only has a basic charge and jump attack, and that's pretty much it. If you're going to give a basic moveset like this, the least you can do is give the ability to move while he swings his weapon. You can't even change the direction of your attacks mid-swing. I used to think that Twilight Princess Link was very stiff with his attacks until we started learning many of his sword techniques from the hero Shade, and that shut me up pretty quickly. So why is it that Breath of the Wild Link does not have a diverse moveset? Once again, this could add to the rewards formula of scouring the land, finding the many master swordsmen or master spearmen that can teach Link a new sword technique. Imagine yourself wandering around until you come across a large river, and you follow that river upstream until you find a large waterfall. So you just so happen to go behind that waterfall and see a cave. You then follow that cave to the end until you find the location of one of the master swordsmen scattered across the land at the end of it, and he rewards you by teaching you a new sword technique. This teaches players to explore every square inch of the map to find as many hidden secrets as possible. because you never know what you might find, and we know that there are people who will certainly do this. I mean, just take for example the Korok seeds. I know that there are some people out there who actually went and collected all of the Korok seeds in Breath of the Wild, and they got a nice little present at the end. Another major mechanic that I think needs to be overhauled is the use of items. I find it kind of jarring that you're able to simply open up a menu after taking a big hit from an enemy and just stuff your face full of food to heal. Not only does this slow down the pacing of the game, but I also find this to be pretty overpowered and completely removes any sort of real difficulty that the game has, especially later in your playthrough. One of the major setbacks that a lot of Zelda games have fixed over time has been dealing with opening up menus. Ocarina of Time was one of the worst offenders of this when it came to using the iron boots, but was later fixed where you no longer have to go into the menu to be able to equip the boots to dive underwater. And somehow it seems like we have completely regressed back to that when it comes to Tears of the Kingdom. In almost every encounter that I had in battle of some kind, it felt as though I was always going back into the menu to fuse items to my arrows, or to fuse or to swap out to different abilities. There was just a lot going on in the menus. I think cooking and having food still needs to make a return for Zelda, but I think they need to sort of maybe nerf the effects of what it's able to do, such as healing. One thing I think they could possibly do is instead delegate all your healing to potions. That way this gives empty bottles and also potions especially more relevance in the game. One of the best examples that I can give comes from Skyward Sword again, how you could heal using potions in real time when you're in the midst of battle. As for Link using bows, I don't really have anything I would like to change. I think bullet time is a fantastic feature and I really wouldn't change much about it. However, I would definitely not want to have to go into the menu over and over again just to attach items to my arrows. That's why I think bringing back magic would be nice, so we can have magic based fire arrows and ice arrows again. I think this is a feature that needs to be scrapped, but we'll get into that very soon. Now, I'm sure other people can come up with better ideas than me, but we just need better rewards in the open world other than just a few good items sprinkled here and there, some DLC armor pieces, and some rupees. As for the weapon break system, I didn't really mind it that much compared to other people, but instead of the weapon breaking and disappearing entirely, just let it stay in your inventory as a broken weapon, and then you can either toss it away like normal and then it disappears, or you can hang on to that broken weapon and have it repaired in town or something with the right material, and for a fee of course. No more of this fusing rocks to sticks, please. It was interesting for a one-time thing, but we do not need the fuse mechanic to ever return again. The same can be said about Link's other abilities like the Ultra Hand. These abilities to me are kind of broken in Tears and should not ever exist again. I'll say it once more, it was a really fun gameplay mechanic, but I don't think we need anything like it again. As for something like Ascend and even manipulating time, I think these should be locked behind some kind of item or ability that you get later in the game. That way it gives more meaning to returning to places you've already been to solve a puzzle that you previously was unable to do, or playing a mini game you couldn't because you didn't have the right ability. Lastly, for the gameplay, I still think we need more music in 3D Zelda. Echoes of Wisdom had music in its open world, granted it was a top-down 2D game, but it just means that it can work for 3D Zelda just as well like in the past. I don't necessarily think we need to have this sort of atmospheric ambience kind of music all the time. Alright, let's switch gears and talk about the storyline of the modern day Zelda games.
Is that what I think it is? Look at this. I don't believe it, but I actually caught one. This delicacy is known to have very, very potent effects under the proper circumstances. Ta-da! Research from the castle shows in...
And let me just go ahead and get some of the negativity out of the way first, because there is something extraordinary to latch onto with the modern day games. So first, I really do hate exposition dumps in video games, and at first, I didn't know why I didn't like this in Zelda particularly. Something just felt off to me. but I couldn't quite understand while I was playing the game. But after finishing it and sitting back and analyzing the story, that it occurred to me, everything in the story has already unfolded, and as the player, you're just now coming into the picture toward the end of this long story. Basically, you are the conclusion to this long drawn out story. It's just a matter of walking up to the final boss and initiating the last fight, which you can do at the very start of Breath of the Wild. However, it goes so much deeper than that. You see, when a game that is not renowned for its story chooses not to put so much emphasis on said story, having it be told to you through flashbacks or in an exposition dump doesn't really hit that hard in the gut. But in a franchise like The Legend of Zelda, where the narrative is more often than not structured very well and has an intricate storyline, there are going to be some highs and lows. In other words, it has its build-ups, its high-stakes moments, turning points, and of course, its conclusion. And throughout these moments, your objective in the story might change. A good example is Skyward Sword, and I know I keep using Skyward Sword, but I use it here because it is one of the most story-driven Zelda games to date. But honestly, you can use pretty much any traditional Zelda game as an example. You and Zelda are having a good old time flying around in the sky, and you just know the good times are not going to last. Zelda falls to the surface and Link has to go after her. However, midway through your journey, you learn that an evil force is after Zelda. So after tracking her down, she gives you the harp, and now you have to find a way to forge the goddess sword into the master sword. Another quick example is Ocarina of Time. You're tasked with retrieving the 3 spiritual stones to open the door to the sacred realm where the master sword sleeps. You try to beat Ganondorf to the sacred realm, but you play right into his hands, and now you must awaken the 7 sages to seal this man away. Number 1, the story is told to us in real time and you are playing an active role in it. Number 2, we only learn the things that Link learned as we continue and progress through the story. Not everything is laid out on the table for us to see, which leads me to my main point. It's not the stories themselves that are bad in the modern day games, but the structure of them. I actually really love the story of Tears and Breath, but it's so unfortunate that we never got to experience being actually a part of the story that unfolded. I mean, I guess you could argue that Age of Calamity allowed us to experience being in the story, but that was more of a what-if scenario with a different ending and everything to it, so it doesn't really count. I wanted to be there when we met all of the different champions. I wanted to be a part of them taking pictures and having a good old time before the calamity struck. And I wanted to be part of the initial awakening of Calamity Ganon. But the game said, no, this is not where your story begins. Echoes of Wisdom is the most recent Zelda game that we got, with it bringing back the idea of open world exploration. But it was done much better than Breath and Tears combined, in my opinion. The game restricts the player to completing the first dungeon before opening up the rest of the map, allowing you to tackle any of the next 2 dungeons in any order before steering you down the middle with a mid-game dungeon that you must complete, building up more tension and raising the stakes of the story before releasing you back out into the open world to tackle the 3 remaining dungeons in any order once again. I hope that Echoes of Wisdom is the pioneer that establishes this formula for future Zelda installments. It's not as if the Zelda team has not done this before, so I know that it's possible to do with the 3D games as well. I 100% believe it's possible to have an open world experience with a more linear, focused storyline combined with dungeons being segmented off from the overworld and letting them be something similar to the shrines, where there is a loading screen upon entering the dungeon. This way the developers can flex their creativity with puzzles, since we know that they still have that in them to make fantastic puzzles thanks to the many shrines. And if they are able to strike this balance, I truly believe that the next 3D Zelda could be even better than Breath of the Wild. To anyone who is concerned for the series, I would say that the Zelda series has always been about innovation and taking risks. From the moment the first Zelda game was released, the series has been about pushing boundaries and trying new things. And while it's natural to have some trepidation about change, I think we can trust that the Zelda team would never do something to compromise the essence of the Legend of Zelda series. But what do you guys think? Is there something in the next 3D Zelda game that you want changed? Do you agree with any of my points, or do you think the modern day Zelda games are fine as they are? Let me know in the comments below. Alright, there you have it guys. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if so, be sure to smash that like button for your boy and subscribe for more content like this if you haven't already. We are steadily counting down to the Switch 2 presentation, and I've got more for you guys coming. Check out this video of my top 7 of the best 2D Zelda games on the market if you haven't already. Either way, I appreciate you guys all the same, and with that, I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.